Before we begin our Bible study, just go through some of the sick folks. Brother Terry is still home with the pneumonia, both lungs, severe case, so we need to keep him in our prayers. Holly, something has gone wrong, I guess would be the best way to put it. They have overdosed her. She is basically non-responsive right now. They've even given her one dose of Narcan and haven't given her anything for 16 hours, and she is still non-responsive as far as verbally. She feels some pain and can howl, but that's about it. So we really do need to keep her in our prayers now. Oh yes, still in the hospital. It all happened at the hospital. So we Jay keeps checking on it. He's going down after service this morning, and hopefully by then a doctor will be in. But they have done blood work and CAT scans and everything to rule out things. So just keep her in your prayers if you would. Sister Dot, Brother Glenn is home, still recovering from their procedures. And Tim's brother has his surgery in the morning. For those that don't remember, he was bitten by a brown recluse around the spine area, and they had to get rid of a lot of infection and make sure there was no infection before they would go in and do the surgery to get out all that mess. If you're not from around here, a brown recluse is one of the nastiest little creatures that can bite you. So. Is there anybody else that we need to think about on the sick and injured? Or okay, Brother Kirk Mayfield, would you lead us in a prayer then before we begin our class? Wait just a moment. All right. Okay, and also Owen, grandson, is still perking along and doing good. Okay, Brother Kirk. Amen. Matthew chapter 28. Matthew chapter 28. I'm sorry, 27. We still got a few verses in 27 we want to look at. But if you recall, what we've been doing to this point is we've gone through Jesus' betrayal, his arrest, his trial, his crucifixion. And Wednesday night we had left off in verse 54 and talked about the centurion and him coming up and saying, truly, this was the Son of God, and what a centurion's position is. So now we're getting into verse 55. And I find verse 55 particularly interesting because it says, and many women were there, beholding afar off, which followed Jesus from Galilee, ministering unto him. So just to put things in perspective, as the disciples were moving about with Jesus as he was going from place to place to teach, there were also women to take care of their food needs and clothing upkeep. You know what women do. And I find it amazing. Well, let me back up and start here. When it says that many women were there afar off, there's a couple of reasons or a couple of possibilities why they were afar off. One might have been that they were standing off because of reasons of modesty, because when they crucified people, they stripped them of their clothes and crucified them. The other reason could be that back in those days that was the place for women. If you remember, even in the temple area, there was a place for women. There was a place for the non-Jew, and then there was a place for the men Jews. So it could have been either one of those two reasons, but that's not what I find so fascinating. The part that I find fascinating is that these women travel with him, and what did his disciples do when he was arrested? They left, except for Peter. Peter hung around pretty close. But then after that, then they all just seemed to go by the wayside. It seems like the women here stayed the course. They were the steady ones from start to finish on this. And now they're standing afar off and looking to see what's going on. It says among them was Mary Magdalene, and we know from other scripture that she was one that had been cleansed of evil spirits. Mary, the mother of James and Joseph, the mother of Zebedee's children. Probably Joanna also was there. We find her mentioned in Luke as one of them that traveled around with them. But anyway, there were women there that were watching out and going to take care of things. And verse 57 says, when the even was come, there came a rich man of Arimathea named Joseph, who also himself was Jesus' disciple. Now, if we look at some other scripture, and this is probably the same Joseph that was in the Sanhedrin Council. If we'll look at John chapter 19, and verse 38, it says, and after this, Joseph of Arimathea, being a disciple of Jesus, but secretly for fear of the Jew, besought Pilate that they might take him away, take away the body of Jesus, and Pilate gave him permission. So even though he is a disciple, he's still a little bit leery about the Jew. And then if we look at Luke 23 and verse 50, Luke 23 and verse 50, I know there's a page here. There we go. It said, and behold, there was a man named Joseph, a counselor, and he was a good man and just. So even though he was on the Sanhedrin Council, more than likely, he was a good man and just. And here he was a follower of Jesus, and he was wanting him to be buried in a proper manner. Because if he had not stepped forward, how would Jesus have been buried? Well, he would have been left on the cross for a while, and then he would have been buried with the common people. Now, the significance of that, I believe, and this is a personal opinion, but if he had been buried with the common people, they wouldn't have had a very good opportunity to secure the gravesite. Therefore, they couldn't know that he had actually arisen, as what we're going to find out took place, the way he arose with the boulder there and all. So I think it very important that here man steps forward and then puts him in a very secure location, buries him with as a noble person instead of just the commoner. But he went to Pilate, begged the body of Jesus, then Pilate commanded the body to be delivered. So this would give him then the honorable burial. Questions or comments so far? Right. The Sanhedrin Council really had not that much to do with this. Was the priests and elders of the temple that were more going after that than the Sanhedrin Council itself. Now, Saul, when he was on the council, he was right the opposite, because he was, with the priest's permission, he was the one that was persecuting the church, and he was with the council. Shows the difference between the two there, I believe. So, anything else? Okay. Back in Matthew chapter 59 then says, and when Joseph had taken the body, he wrapped it in a clean linen cloth. Somebody go to John chapter 19 and read verses 39 and 40. John 19, 39 and 40.
Some of the Pharisees from the crowd said to him, please rebuke your disciples again, and I say you, wrong, sorry. Let somebody else read. I went to the wrong gospel.
Yeah, try John 19. That sure didn't sound familiar. John 19. John 19, 39 and 40.
Nicodemus, who at first came to Jesus by night, also came bringing a mixture of myrrh and aloes, weighing about 75 pounds. Then they took the body of Jesus and wrapped it in linen cloths with spices, as is the burial custom.
All right. So when Joseph of Arimathea went and got the body, and they took it to be buried, he wasn't by himself there because Nicodemus came and brought all those spices. So they, in essence, they did a quick burial, because why were the women going back the next day with all the spices? That was when they was preparing the body for the burial. So here it appears as though they was going to do it the second time and do it more completely than had been done the first time. But the body was wrapped. It was treated with the way they did. One version says 100 pounds. Your version said 75, but still, that's a lot of stuff to use. But they had prepared the body, and they laid it in his own new tomb, a tomb that had not been used before, which had been hewn out in the rock, and he rolled a great stone to the door of the sepulchre and departed. Now, normally, what would take place when somebody prepared a burial place that way, and you've probably seen this in some of the movies that you've watched, is when they go into the cave area, then in the wall there are niches, and there are several in the same location. So it is very probable that Joseph of Arimathea here, he had prepared a cave for his whole family, but it had never been used. And then they put and he had that stone that they could roll to and fro when they needed to get in. So if we look at it that way, because later on, let's just wait till we get there. But he had laid in that new sepulchre, and they departed. And there was Mary Magdalene and the other Mary sitting over against the sepulchre. So they not only stood afar off when he was crucified and observed that, but now they came up to the gravesite. They were staying real close to see what was going on. And then the next day that followed the day of preparation, the chief priests and Pharisees came together unto Pilate. Now we're about to get another conspiracy going here, saying, Sir, we remember that the deceiver said while he was yet alive, after 3 days I will rise again. Command, therefore, that the sepulchre be made sure until the 3rd day, lest his disciples come by night and steal him away and say unto the people, he is risen from the dead. So the last era shall be worse than the first. See, they are trying their best to completely eradicate Jesus. They killed him. Now they don't want they want to make sure that nothing lingers about him. And Pilate said unto them, ye have a watch. Now what would that mean? You have a watch. You already have guards. Now, again, it is not specified, and it could be one of several things. One of the things it could be would be that those that were, say, 100 of them, because there was a centurion over 100 at the crucifixion. They could have been the ones that were told to go take care of this duty. That duty could have lasted 3 or 4 or 5 days. So in essence, they didn't have an assignment at that time. It could have been them. Or more likely, it could have been guards at the temple. And how the Romans, the way they normally did things, I'll tell you, Brother Jim, if you don't mind, go over to Acts chapter 12. Acts chapter 12 and verse 4.
When he had seized him, he put him in prison and handed him over to 4 squads of soldiers to guard him, intending to bring him before people after Passover.
Okay, so they handed him over to 4 squads or quatrains or whatever word you want to use there, but they handed them over to 4 groups. There were 4 in each group, so mainly that would be that there were 16 people. Now, the reason they had that many was that the way they did things then, they would change guard every 4 hours. So you have 4 guarding, and then 4 hours later, they put another 4 and another 4 and another 4. When I was in the Air Force and we was doing things, depending on weather, our guard stations could last up to 8 hours. And then we would switch out. We'd switch out 3 at a time. Now, if the weather was really nasty, cold, and that kind of stuff, they would change them more frequently. But what do they do these days, Brother Jeremy? Normally 4-hour watches? Okay. Well, you're in the Army too. I was in the Air Force. So. Okay. But the 4-hour watch is there, and that's what they was doing. So they went and made the sepulchre sure, sealing the stone and setting watch. If it were a watch appointed by a pilot to be there with them, these 4 quatrains, they would have used a signet ring, the wax, to seal it to make sure it was done, and that way they could tell if anybody that was not authorized went into it. But they wanted to make sure, so they set all of that in place. Now, as we begin chapter 28, is there any comments on anything so far? His betrayal, his arrest, his trial, his crucifixion, burial. Okay. Chapter 28. In the end of the Sabbath, as it began to dawn toward the first day of the week, came Mary Magdalene and the other Mary to see the sepulchre. Now, when it says that it began to dawn the first day of the week, what day are we talking about? It would be Sunday. Back in those days, Sunday would have started about what we would consider 6 p.m. on Saturday night, because their days started in the evening time. So here, as it starts to dawn on that first day of the week, came Mary to see to the sepulchre. And behold, there was a great earthquake. Now, the Lord is going to come out of the grave on Sunday. He was buried on Friday. Saturday, Sunday. Shouldn't he be coming out on Monday? Okay. Also, the Jews counted differently than we do. they start the day that things happen, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. They're inclusive of the day, whereas we start things with the next day. So there is no problem here with it being the third day. But there was a great earthquake, for the angel of the Lord descended from the heaven and came and rolled back the stone from the door and sat upon it. I think it particularly interesting here that angel can also mean messenger, but here it is very clear that the angel of the Lord descended from heaven to roll back the stone. So this is not just your common messenger. This is one sent from God to take care of that. His countenance was like lightning. Today, when we think of countenance, what do we think of? Generally, just the face. We think about somebody's face if we're looking at them and seeing their change in attitude and all like that. But back in those days, they took in the whole person. And here his countenance was like lightning, his raiment white as snow. So this was a special person. Acts 1 and verse 10, when Christ is about to ascend, we get into the same type of description there with the white robes and the celestial people there. Verse 4 says, and for fear of him, the keepers did shake and became as dead men. I can sort of imagine that. What would you do if all of a sudden you're standing someplace, a graveyard, and you see somebody that looks like lightning and got that bright countenance, clothed in white, come and shake some rocks and move things around? What's going to be your first thought? So I can see where there might be a little fear there. But then the angel answered and said unto the women, fear not, for I know that ye seek Jesus which was crucified. You think this put them totally at peace then? Or was there still a little apprehension?
Probably a little shock and awe.
Shock and awe. Good phrase. And then he said, he is not here, for he is risen. As he said, come see the place where the Lord lay. So they're there. Everything shakes up. Stones rolled away. The angel says he's not here. Come see for yourself. To me, again, it's you can read into it, but it's not very clear, but it appears as though Christ arose and departed before the stone was rolled away. The reason I say that is if you look at it, there was the earthquake and the angel coming down, rolled the stone from the door. His countenance was bright. The caretaker was apparently there and shaken, and the women were there, and he said, fear not. So, questions, comments, or?
We don't know exactly, but I've always tend to think it was a great earthquake.
And the stone was rolling?
And then it's where the angel of the Lord descended. I think that great earthquake sort of the horizon. He ascended to heaven, and the angel came down at the same time to roll the stone. But we don't know if that's exactly.
We don't know, and it really doesn't matter, but he didn't need that stone to be moved for him to make an exit. Yes, ma'am. Right. All of it simultaneous type, yeah. Okay. But he wasn't there. Then he told them, go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead, and behold, he goeth before you into Galilee. There shall you see him. Lo, I have told you. So the messenger, the angel, gives them some instructions, the women some instructions to follow. And they departed quickly from the sepulchre with fear and great joy, and did run to bring his disciples word. Why fear? You can understand great joy, but why were they afraid? Plus the fact you think they're going to be believed. Wouldn't there be that apprehension of, hey, we're going to tell them, but they're not going to believe this? Right? So I sort of think it that way, that they're not afraid of anything that has happened. They just fear because when they go and tell the disciples he's risen, that there's going to be some, probably some chuckling going on and ridicule. They're not serious. Brother, hold on. They're still approximately 50 days away from knowing what's really taking place, right? He's not here. Where is he? He's going to meet them in Galilee. They'll see him there. But what is going on? Mm. Yeah, and as you read through it, sometime one gospel will expand on it and the other will sort of give an overview. Absolutely. But they did run to bring his disciples word, and as they went to tell the disciples, behold, Jesus met them, saying, all hail. And they came and held him by the feet and worshiped him. So they were about to go tell the disciples, had a little fear, great joy, and now the one that they had seen crucified, seen killed, seen buried, 3 days later, when they're going to tell the disciples that he is risen, they bump into him. This was not an accident by bumping into, but I mean, they come in contact with Jesus himself. That must have been awesome. Then said Jesus unto them, be not afraid, go tell my brethren that they go into Galilee, and there shall they see me. This is the first time that Jesus uses the word brethren when he is talking about his disciples. Why do you think that would be? I personally think that you nailed it. I believe that this was the first time he used it because prior to this, prior to his crucifixion, prior to his coming out of the grave, well, prior to his crucifixion, the old law was in effect. Once he was crucified, the old law was nailed to the cross. The new is now in effect. Now his kingdom is in place. Now all of those people that are his, that obey his rules and become his, are his brethren. I might be making too much out of this deal, but that's just something I think. Questions, comments, disagreements? Okay. Verse 11. Now when they were going, behold, some of the watch came into the city and showed unto the chief priest all the things that were done. Now, why would they go to the chief priest if they were Roman soldiers that were told to be on watch? Why would they not go to Pilate? If they had gone straightway to Pilate, what was the penalty for letting a prisoner escape, even a live prisoner? It was death to the one that was standing watch over him. Remember in the book of Acts, the jailer? What was the jailer about to do? He was about to kill himself, and then he was told no, but then the jailer believed him. So the penalty was death if they had gone straight to. So they go to the priest and tell the priest everything that had been done. And again, in my opinion, for a couple of reasons. One is Pilate didn't want to crucify him to start with. Pilate didn't want him dead to start with. But still, Pilate has to follow the Roman rules. It was the priest that set all this up, and it was the priest that also came to Pilate saying, put a guard there so we can make sure this don't happen. So who then would be the first person you report to say it did happen? The one that was responsible for setting the watch, right? And when they were assembled with the elders and had taken counsel, they gave large money unto the soldiers, saying, say ye, his disciples came by night and stole him away while we slept. Like I said, we're getting into another conspiracy because they did everything wrong to get him a death penalty. Now they're trying to cover up the truth by saying he didn't really rise. Brother Jeremy? Mm-hmm. My dad had a saying about people like this. He'd say, son, so they'd argue with a signpost and then turn around and throw rocks at it. So I guess that's what's taking place here. They are in such state of denial that they're going to try everything they can to keep things quiet. But they gave them large sums of money. Even though they gave them large sums of money, if I had been one of those guards and went to the priest and had been given large sums of money, I would have still been worried about the big boss putting me to death, and the money wouldn't have done me any good. But they made peace with that too. They was going to make sure that they covered them with the authorities. Again, and also, to me, when they tell the soldiers to lie about what happened, that would have put them in a very bad light also, wouldn't it? Here are you 4 people that are entrusted with making sure that this doesn't happen, and now you let it happen. You're standing a 4-hour watch and you're go to sleep.
Maybe the reason behind that they were acting up on that line. Maybe it was maybe they could have gotten away with the excuse that they fell asleep. People came more than they were awake and allowed it to happen. That's why I'm thinking that, because the body, even their excuse they said to tell the governor, even that they still allowed the body to be taken because they were asleep. But I'm thinking that's easier than saying, we can say, well, you're not awake, and yeah, we were awake. I mean, whatever the case may be. They would have been accused of being accomplices to whatever would happen. Which happened was the resurrection. They had no control over, but in everybody else's mind, they're like, oh, that thing, what they were waiting was even worse.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, a soldier whose responsibility is to stand watch if he admits that he went to sleep. Now, when I was in the military, we could get away with some things that they can't get away with these days. Brother Doug and I have talked about this a little bit. If you fall asleep at your post, back in the day when I was in, if you are caught sleeping at your post, it was an automatic Article 15. That is, if the commander found out about it. On the first event, normally the commander didn't find out about it. But those that were with that individual took care of the situation. And odds are he would not fall asleep a second time. Same way when I was in basic training. We had a fellow that he didn't like water and soap. He didn't like to bathe. And when you're in basic training, you do a lot of sweating. Well, let me rephrase that for you ladies. We do a lot of perspiring. But one day we get called out to formation that morning, and the sergeant comes by and TI, and he looks at this fella and says, "You sure are mighty red." Said, "Did you stay out in the sun too long yesterday?" No, sir. That was all that was said. Why was he so red? You know what happened to him the night before? You know how stiff the bristles are in a GI brush? And you know what a GI brush and soap can do to you? It'll get you clean. But from that day forward, we never had an issue with him. He always took his bath. Same way that people sleeping on their post. He is watching out for your safety. So if he gets caught, you take care of him the first time. And if that don't work, then you turn him over. You can't get away with that these days, can you, Brother Jeremy? Not much. Since you're just going into the Marine training, let that be a lesson to you. Stay awake. Verse 14, and if this come to the governor's ear, we will persuade him and secure you. So they had made all these arrangements. They had paid the guards off. And then how do you think they're going to persuade Pilate, the governor, to not take any action against these soldiers? Soldiers that slept at their post. Soldiers that let a dead prisoner escape. Not a live one, but a dead one escape. How are the priests going to make things right with Pilate? It doesn't say, but if they're going to secure it, maybe a little money changed hands, or maybe just some politics. Because see, this would have also gone up from Pilate up to Caesar. So they just tried to keep things real quiet. So they took the money and did as they were taught. And this saying is commonly reported among the Jews unto this day. So even though it was a conspiracy, and even though things were supposed to be quiet, kept on the down low, word got out. It's in our Bible. Everybody knows it. Talked about among the Jews. When two people know a secret, what's the best way to keep a secret? There you go. Verse 16, then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee, into a mountain where Jesus had appointed them. All right, so everything's going full circle here. In the end, they're going to wind up at a different location, but right now they're in the mountain. Verse 17, when they saw him, they worshiped him, but some doubted. I have always been curious about that phrase. They knew him, and 3 days or so later, they meet him, and some doubted. How could you doubt?
No different than today. You got people that work almost just like that. I mean, literally, I've seen a guy like I was living in the church, you know, and so maybe they thought this can't be got to be somebody that's a false teacher, which is trying to lead him or what. Obviously, the people look like that's sort of been my thinking on that.
Well, they say that everybody does have a twin in this world. I sure would hate to meet mine. But it could be that. But again, it could be like Thomas. What did Thomas say? Unless, and it's not just lay eyes on him, but unless I feel where the nails were, I'm not going to believe. So, could have been that. Yes, sir. And they could have thought he hadn't really died, you know, they have all of that, but after they saw him, they worshiped, but some doubted. Then Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Go ye therefore and teach all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost. A lot of people stop right there, but I think the more important verse is the one that follows. Teaching them to observe all things whatsoever I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even unto the end of the world. So if we want to look at this last two verses as our charter, our charge, it is our responsibility to teach everybody. It is our responsibility then to baptize those who are willing in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Ghost. It is also our responsibility then to teach them what they have to do to stay in that saved condition. Questions, comments? We've finished just a minute or so early, but is anybody got any questions or comments? Yes, ma'am. Right. Right. I have personally, and I'm sure some of you have too, I've talked to people who would say, oh, I just don't know enough to be baptized yet. Well, you go through the list. Do you know this, 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 and this? Yeah, well, you know enough. Now you have to build on that once you become a Christian. So thank y'all so much for your attention and your comments.